This week, we conclude our chapter on the Ineffable Name, coming from the Symbolism of Freemasonry. What does the word truly mean? What is the real word? According to one brother's theory, a word that we have never talked about before, coming directly from the Kabbalah. We even discuss what each attribute might stand for: the Tetragrammaton, the triangle, the all-seeing eye, all discussed, plus some exclusive news toward the end of the show. Don't miss out. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry. Here's your host, Brother Robert Johnson.
Welcome back. This is episode number 526, the last episode of the year for 2021. I want to thank our producers, fellows, contributors, and legacy partners for all of your support this year and making the Whence Came You podcast successful and a tried and tested true place for quality Masonic education. I want to thank you all for sharing the episodes with your brothers and, just in general for everybody sharing the show with people who have a curiosity for Freemasonry and its kindred sciences. Being able to produce this content means the world to me and to so many others. So thank you so much. The next thing I wanted to mention was the success of Double Eagle Con. What an amazing time we had with great presentations by Bob Davis, Roberto Sanchez, Chuck Dunning, Darren Laners, Jeff Croto, Steve Harrison, Brent Morris, Joseph Wages. I think I named them all, but what an amazing day. A big shout out to the folks who helped put us on, which would be Brother David Truax, Brother Scott Duvall, Brother Justice Fisher, Brother Guide Sobecki, and of course the Valley Secretary David Koss and one of our administrators, Debbie. They just really made this whole thing possible. It went off just wonderfully. So huge thanks to everybody who came out for that. It was a fantastic and successful event, and hopefully we'll have another one. So you can look for news for Double Eagle Con 2022, maybe. We got to wait and see what the board thinks. And, the next thing here in Chicago will likely be the AMD in-gathering for Illinois. I'll be assisting to putting that together as the superintendent for Illinois. And other things happening, conferences that I think you all should think about going to are, of course, the Midwest Conference, which is going to be April 29th through May 1st in Kansas City, Missouri. And then we've got Masonic Week, which is in February, which I think is a very big deal. I think you all should really heavily think about going. Then, of course, Masonicon Kansas, which is coming later in 2022. Ticket sales are going to be blasting off in January. I was announced as a speaker, so I can say that now. I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be a great convention as always. When you get the fine minds of Masonic greatness together, Alex Powers and a lot of the guys from the Grand Lodge of Kansas, then you're going to end up with a really successful event. I'm looking forward to it. So last week we took a little breather for a chapter of the Symbolism of Freemasonry, and the chapter was called The Ineffable Name. So we want to finish out this chapter. It's not super long, but it's long enough that we wanted to split up the episode in order to bring this to you in a meaningful way. So I will read the immediate previous paragraph to where we left off, just so we have a little bit of context, and then we'll go right into the rest of the chapter. Among the Egyptians whose connection with the Hebrews was more immediate than that of any other people, and where consequently there was greater similarity of rites, the same sacred name is said to have been used as a password for the purpose of gaining admission to their mysteries. In the Brahminic mysteries of Hindustan, the ceremony of initiation was terminated by instructing the aspirant with the sacred triliteral name, which was Aum or Om, the three letters of which were symbolic of the creative, preservative, and destructive principles of the Supreme Deity, personified in three manifestations of Brahma, Siva, and Vishnu. This word was forbidden to be pronounced aloud. It was to be the subject of silent meditation to the pious Hindu. In the rites of Persia, an ineffable name was also communicated to the candidate after his initiation. Mithras, the principal divinity in these rites, who took the place of the Hebrew Jehovah and represented the sun, had this peculiarity in his name. that the numeral value of the letters of which was composed amounted to precisely 365, the number of days which constitute a revolution of the earth around the sun, or, as they then supposed, of the sun around the earth. In the mysteries introduced by the Pythagoreans into Greece, we again find the ineffable name of the Hebrews, obtained doubtless by the Samian sage during his visit to Babylon. The symbol adopted by him to express it, however, is somewhat different, being 10 points distributed in the form of a triangle, each side containing 4 points as the annexed figure. The apex of the triangle was consequently a single point, then followed below by 2 others, then 3, and lastly the base consisting of 4. These points were by the number in each rank, intended according to Pythagorean system, to denote respectively the monad, or active principle of nature, the duad, or the passive principle, the triad, or world emanating from the union, and the quaterniad, or intellectual science, the whole number of points amounting to 10, the symbol of perfection and consumption. The figure was called by Pythagoras the tetractys, or the tetracytus, a word equivalent in signification to the Tetragrammaton, and it was deemed so sacred that on it the oath of secrecy and fidelity was administered to the aspirants of the Pythagorean rites. Among the Scandinavians, as among the Jewish Kabbalists, the supreme God who was made known in their mysteries had 12 names, of which the principal and most sacred one was Allfader, or the Universal Father. Among the Druids, the sacred name of God was Hu, a name which, although it is supposed by Bryant to have been intended by them for Noah, will be recognized as one of the modifications of the Hebrew Tetragrammaton. It is, in fact, the masculine pronoun in Hebrew, and may be considered as the symbolization of the male or generative principle in nature, a sort of modification of the system of phallic worship. This sacred name among the Druids reminds me of what is the latest and undoubtedly the most philosophical speculation on the true meaning, as well as the pronunciation of the ineffable Tetragrammaton. It is from the ingenious mind of the celebrated Lanci, or Lanchi, and I have already, in another work, given it to the public, as I received it from his pupil, and my friend, Mr. Glidden, the distinguished archaeologist, but the results are too curious to be omitted whenever the Tetragrammaton is discussed. Elsewhere, I have very fully alluded to the prevailing sentiment among the ancients that the supreme deity was bisexual or hermaphrodite, including, in the essence of his being, the male and female principles, the generative and prolific powers of nature. This was the universal doctrine in all the ancient religions, and was very naturally developed in the symbol of the phallus and cetus among the Greeks, and in the corresponding one of the lingam and the yoni among the Orientalists, from which the symbols of the Masonic point within a circle is a legitimate derivation. They all taught that God the Creator was both male and female. Now this theory is undoubtedly unobjectionable on the score of the orthodoxy, if we view it in the spiritual sense, in which its first propounders must necessarily have intended it to be presented to the mind, and not in the gross, sensual meaning in which it was subsequently received. For taking the word sex, not in its ordinary and colloquial signification, as denoting the indication of a particular physical organization, but in that purely philosophical one which alone can be used in such connection, and which simply signifies the mere manifestation of a power, it is not to be denied that the Supreme Being must possess in himself, and in himself alone, both generative and a prolific power. This idea, which was so extensively prevalent among the nations of antiquity, has also been traced in the Tetragrammaton, or Name of Jehovah, with a singular ingenuity, by Lanchi, and, what is almost equally as interesting, he has by this discovery been enabled to demonstrate what was in all probability the true pronunciation of the word. In giving the details of this philological discovery, I will endeavor to make it as comprehensible as it can be made to those who are not critically acquainted with the construction of the Hebrew language. Those who are will at once appreciate its peculiar character and will excuse the explanatory details, of course, unnecessary to them. The Ineffable Name, the Tetragrammaton, the Shem HaPharesh, for it is known by all these appellations, consists of 4 letters, Yod-He, Vav-He, and forming the word. This word, of course, in accordance with the genius of the Hebrew language, is read, as we would say, backward from right to left, beginning with Yod and ending with He. Of these letters, the first Yud is equivalent to the English I, pronounced as E in the word machine. The second and fourth letter, He, is an aspirate and has here the sound of the English H, and the third letter, Vau, has the sound of an open O. Now, reading these four letters, as the Hebrew requires it from right to left, we have the word, which is really near to the pronunciation as we can well come, notwithstanding it forms neither of the 7 ways in which the word is said to have been pronounced at different times by the patriarchs. But thus pronounced, the word gives us no meaning, for there is no such word in Hebrew as Eo, and as all the Hebrew names were significative of something, it is but fair to conclude that this was not the original pronunciation, and that we must look for another, which will give a meaning to the word. Now, Lanchi proceeds to the discovery of this true pronunciation as follows. In the Kabbalah, a hidden meaning is often deduced from a word by transposing or reversing its letters, and it was in this way that the Kabbalists concealed many of their mysteries. Now, to reverse a word in English is to read its letters from right to left, because our normal mode of reading is from left to right. But in Hebrew, the contrary rule takes place, for their normal mode of reading is from right to left, and therefore to reverse the reading of a word is to read it from left to right. Lanchi applied this Kabbalistic mode to the Tetragrammaton when he found that Eo, being read reversely, makes the word ho-hai. But in Hebrew, ho is the masculine pronoun, equivalent to the English he, and hai is the feminine pronoun, equivalent to she, and therefore the word ho-hai, literally translated, is equivalent to the English he-she. That is to say, the Ineffable Name of God in Hebrew being read Kabbalistically includes within itself the male and female principle, the generative and prolific energy of the creation, and here we have again the widely spread symbolism of the phallus and cetus, the lingam and the yoni, or their equivalent, the point within a circle, and another pregnant proof of the connection between Freemasonry and the ancient mysteries. And here perhaps we may begin to find some meaning for the hitherto incomprehensible passage in Genesis 1:27, quote, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them." End quote. They could not have been in the image of Eo if they had not been male and female. The Kabbalists have exhausted their ingenuity and imagination in speculations on this sacred name, and some of their fancies are really sufficiently interesting to repay an investigation. Sufficient, however, has been here said to account for the important position that it occupies in the Masonic system, and to enable us to appreciate the symbols by which it has been represented. The great reverence, or indeed the superstitious veneration entertained by the ancients for the name of the Supreme Being, led them to express it rather in symbols or hieroglyphics than in any word at length. We know, for instance, from the recent researches of the archaeologists, that in all the documents of the ancient Egyptians written in the demotic or common character of the country, the names of the gods were invariably denoted by symbols. I have already alluded to the different modes by which the Jews expressed the Tetragrammaton. A similar practice prevailed among the other nations of antiquity. Freemasonry has adopted the same expedient, and the Grand Architect of the Universe, whom it is the usage even in ordinary writing to designate by the initials GAOTU, is accordingly presented to us in a variety of symbols, 3 of which particularly require attention. These are the letter G, the equilateral triangle, and the all-seeing eye. Of the letter G I have already spoken. A letter of the English alphabet can scarcely be considered an appropriate symbol of an institution which dates its organization and refers its primitive history to a period long anterior to the origin of that language. Such a symbol is deficient in the 2 elements of antiquity and universality which should characterize every Masonic symbol. There can therefore be no doubt that, in its present form, it is a corruption of the Old Hebrew symbol, the letter Yod, or Yud, by which the sacred name was often expressed. This letter is the initial of the word Jehovah, or Eo, as I have already stated, and is constantly to be met with in Hebrew writings as the symbol or abbreviature of Jehovah, which word, it will be remembered, is never written at length. But because G is, in like manner, the initial of God, the equivalent of Jehovah, this letter has been incorrectly and I cannot refrain from again saying most injudiciously selected to supply in modern lodges the place of the Hebrew symbol. Having then the same meaning and force as the Hebrew Yod, the letter G must be considered, like its prototype, as the symbol of the life-giving and life-sustaining power of God, as manifested in the meaning of the word Jehovah, or EO, the generative and prolific energy of the Creator. The all-seeing eye is another and still more important symbol of the same great being. Both the Hebrews and the Egyptians appear to have derived its use from that natural inclination of figurative minds to select an organ as the symbol of the function which it is intended peculiarly to discharge. Thus the foot was often adopted as the symbol of swiftness, the arm of strength, and the hand of fidelity. On the same principle, the open eye was selected as the symbol of watchfulness, and the eye of God as the symbol of divine watchfulness and care of the universe. The use of the symbol in this sense is repeatedly to be found in the Hebrew writers. Thus the psalmist says, Psalms 34:15, quote, "The eyes of the Lord are upon the righteous, and his ears are open to their cry," end quote, which explains a subsequent passage in which it is said, "Behold, he that keepeth Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep." On the same principle, the Egyptians represented Osiris, their chief deity, by the symbol of an open eye, and placed this hieroglyphic of him in all their temples. His symbolic name on the monuments was represented by the eye accompanying a throne, to which was sometimes added an abbreviated figure of the god, and sometimes what has been called a hatchet, but which I consider may as correctly be supposed to be a representation of a square. The all-seeing eye may then be considered as a symbol of God manifested in his omnipresence, his guardian and preserving character, to which Solomon alludes in the book of Proverbs 15:3 when he says, quote, "The eyes of Jehovah are in every place beholding," or as it might be more faithfully translated, watching, "the evil and the good," end quote. It is a symbol of the omnipresent deity. The triangle is another symbol which is entitled to our consideration. There is, in fact, no other symbol which is more various in its application or more generally diffused throughout the whole system of both the spurious and the pure Freemasonry. The equilateral triangle appears to have been adopted by nearly all of the nations of antiquity as a symbol of the deity. Among the Hebrews, it has already been stated that this figure, with the Yod in the center, was used to represent the Tetragrammaton, or Ineffable Name of God. The Egyptians considered the equilateral triangle as the most perfect of figures and a representative of the great principle of animated existence, each of its sides referring to one of the three departments of creation, the animal, the vegetable, and the mineral. The symbol of universal nature among the Egyptians was the right-angled triangle, of which the perpendicular side represented Osiris, or the male principle, the base Isis, or the feminine or the female principle, and the hypotenuse, their offspring Horus, or the world emanating from the union of both principles. All this, of course, is nothing more nor less than the phallus and cetus, or lingam and yoni, under a different form. The symbol of the right-angled triangle was afterward adopted by Pythagoras when he visited the banks of the Nile, and the discovery which he is said to have made in relation to the properties of this figure, but which he really learned from the Egyptian priests, is commemorated in Masonry by the introduction of the 47th problem of Euclid's book among the symbols of the third degree. Here the same mystical application is supplied as the Egyptian figure, namely, that the union of the male and female, or active and passive principles of nature, has produced the world. For the geometrical proposition being that the squares of the perpendicular and base are equal to the square of the hypotenuse, they may be said to produce it in the same way as Osiris and Isis are equal to or produce the world. Thus the perpendicular, Osiris, or the active male principle, being represented by a line whose measurement is 3, and the base Isis, or the passive female principle, by a line whose measurement is 4. Then their union, or the addition of the squares of these numbers, will produce a square whose root will be the hypotenuse, or a line whose measurement must be 5. For the square of 3 is 9, and the square of 4 is 16, and the square of 5 is 25. But 9 added to 16 is equal to 25, and thus, out of the addition, or coming together, of the squares of the perpendicular and base, arises the square of the hypotenuse, just as, out of the coming together in the Egyptian system, of the active and passive principles arises or is generated the world. In the medieval history of the Christian Church, the great ignorance of the people and their inclination to a sort of materialism led them to abandon the symbolic representation of the deity and to depict the Father with the form and lineaments of an aged man, many of which irreverent paintings as far back as the 12th century are to be found in the religious books and edifices of Europe. But after the period of the Renaissance, a better spirit and purer taste began to pervade the artists of the Church, and thenceforth the Supreme Being was represented only by his name, the Tetragrammaton, inscribed within an equilateral triangle and placed within a circle of rays. Didron, in his invaluable work on Christian iconography, gives one of these symbols, which was carved onto wood in the 17th century, of which I annex a copy. But even in its earliest ages, when the deity was painted or sculpted as a personage, the nimbus or glory which surrounded the head of the Father was often made to assume a triangular form. Didron says on this subject, quote, "A nimbus of a triangular form is thus seen to be the exclusive attribute of the deity, and most frequently restricted to the Father Eternal. The other persons of the Trinity sometimes wear the triangle, but only in representations of the Trinity, and because the Father is with them. Still, even then, beside the Father, who has a triangle, the Son and the Holy Ghost are often drawn with circular nimbus only. The triangle has in all ages and in all religions been deemed a symbol of deity. The Egyptians, the Greeks, and other nations of antiquity considering this figure with the three sides as a symbol of the creative energy displayed in the active and passive or male and female principles and their product, the world. The Christians referred it to their dogma of the Trinity as a manifestation of the Supreme God, and the Jews and the primitive Masons to the three periods of existence included in the signification of the Tetragrammaton, the past, the present, and the future. In the higher degrees of Masonry, the triangle is most important of all symbols, and most generally assumes the name of the delta in allusion to the fourth letter of the Greek alphabet, which is the same form and bears that appellation. The delta, or mystical triangle, is generally surrounded by a circle of rays called a glory. When this glory is distinct from the figure and surrounds it in the form of a circle, as in the example just given from Didron, is an emblem of God's eternal glory. When, as is most usual in the Masonic symbol, the rays emanate from the center of the triangle and, as it were, enshroud in their brilliancy, it is symbolic of the divine light. The perverted ideas of the pagans referred these rays of light to their sun god and their Sabian worship. But the true Masonic idea of this glory is that it symbolizes that eternal light of wisdom which surrounds the Supreme Architect as with a sea of glory, and from him, as a common center, emanates to the universe of his creation, and to which the prophet Ezekiel alludes in his eloquent description of Jehovah, quote, "And I saw as the color of amber, as the appearance of fire round about within it, from the appearance of his own loins even upward, and from his loins even downward I saw, as it were, the appearance of fire, and it had brightness round about." End quote. Chapter 1, verse 27. Dante has also beautifully described the circumfused light of deity. Quote, "There is in heaven a light whose goodly shine makes the Creator visible to all, created that in seeing him alone have peace, and in circle spread so far that the circumference were too loose a zone to girdle in the sun." End quote. On a recapitulation, then, of the views that have been advanced in relation to these three symbols of deity which are to be found in the Masonic system, we may say that each expresses a different attribute. The letter G is the symbol of the self-existent Jehovah. The all-seeing eye is the symbol of the omnipresent God. The triangle is the symbol of the Supreme Architect of the universe, the Creator, and when surrounded by rays of glory, it becomes a symbol of the Architect and Bestower of light. And now, after all, is there not in this whole prevalence of the name of God in so many different symbols throughout the Masonic system something more than a mere evidence of the religious proclivities of the institution? Is there not behind this a more profound symbolism which constitutes, in fact, the very essence of Freemasonry? The names of God, said a learned theologian at the beginning of this century, quote, were intended to communicate the knowledge of God Himself. By these, men were enabled to receive some scanty ideas of His essential majesty, goodness, and power, and to know both whom we are to believe and what we are to believe of Him." End quote. And this train of thought is eminently applicable to the admission of the name into the system of Masonry. With us, the name of God, however expressed, is a symbol of divine truth, which it should be the incessant labor of the Mason to seek. Now, I will have the entire book, The Symbolism of Freemasonry, with all its chapters, OCR'd as a downloadable content for all of our patrons and our supporters, which will go out here in the next week or so. I'll also post the book in the Facebook group Craftsman Plus for those of you who are supporters of the program via Patreon or PayPal. No contemplation questions this week. It's time for you to enjoy the holiday, and we are all being reflective already this time of year. I hope you guys are having an awesome time, and in addition, I'm not going to be drawing a tarot card in this episode either. So with that, I would just tell you all that I hope you have a wonderful holiday season, a great new year. I'll invite you to check out the Lyceum. I am the editor of that publication under the guidance and auspices of my chairman of the Grand Lodge of the Illinois Masonic Education Committee, Brother Michael Overturf, Worshipful Brother Michael Overturf, I should say. And our latest issue, December, should be available on the Illinois Lodge of Research website, and will also likely be emailed to the members of ILOR, as well as all of the folks, all the Master Masons in the state of Illinois, via our Grand Lodge email system. So if you got to read it ASAP, you can head on over to ILOR, their website, IllinoisLodgeofResearch.org. And otherwise, it'll be in your inbox. If you're a member of ILOR or a Grand Lodge of Illinois, check it out whenever you like. I want to thank all of our producers, fellows, contributors, and legacy partners for all of your time and all of your patience and all of your assistance and support this year. Seriously, we could not do this without you. I hope you're all getting the holiday cards I sent out as a thank you. And those of you who just became patrons of the show, who just became supporters and backers, your cards and all of those things are on their way to you as well. I am working diligently to get book orders out and things. If you had bought copies of Ancient and Modern Initiation, or perhaps It's Business Time, or even The Master's Word, all of those are available on WCYpodcast.com as autographed editions. However, I am really trying to stay on top of the mail to get those to you before the holidays. And in addition, if shipping is an issue, waiting for that autograph, then feel free to check out Amazon.com as well. Links to our books on Amazon are on our website as well. And if you go through there, it helps us out a little bit. And I think you still get prime shipping as long as they've got plenty of copies that are printed, which last I checked they did. So with that, I want to thank you all very much for another amazing year of Masonic education. We'll be talking to you in just a couple weeks. We'll be back here, and we'll be back at the Masonic Roundtable as well. We've got new stuff coming, and there might just be a little bonus episode that comes out for our patrons and our PayPal subscribers who assist us with the production of the cost. What will that episode contain? I don't know. It may be a bonus episode. We might wait for the January issue. What is it going to be? How about Masonic Mythbusters? With a special guest who is an expert in all things that they'll be talking about. There's a lot of things in Freemasonry that just aren't true that we talk about all the time. And we talk about them like they're true, but they're not. So we've got a brother who dives in and will be telling the truth. Some paradigms will be destroyed. Others will be reinforced. One thing's for certain, we will all learn something together. We'll talk to you all in a couple weeks. Until then, stay on the level. For Whence Came You, I'm Robert Johnson. Take care, everyone.
You've been listening to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry with your host, Brother Robert Johnson. Be sure to join us for our next edition.